Welcome to another Journey in the Blue Sky. My name is Aaron.
My name is Patricia.
And today we're going to be talking about Epic, but I've got to be honest with you, I think the title might be a little bit misleading.
Oh, really? It wasn't epic for you? It wasn't colossal? It wasn't stupendous? It wasn't action-packed?
I think I've got another word for this movie. Do you know what that is?
What's that?
Borrowed. And the reason I say this is because for watching this movie, and there's part of me that already feels like some of the elements that I've seen in this movie, I feel like I've seen already, but just done way better. And so some of these examples that I feel like I'm going to be reaching out to, well, maybe we should probably go through the movie, and maybe we should probably tell everybody about how we feel like it connects with other movies. And let me just safely say this. There is a saying that kind of goes on is that, if you just completely copy something, it's plagiarism. However, you copy from multiple sources, it's research.
Yeah.
And this movie feels like research in a way. So, but not in a good way.
Yeah, and to think that this was based off of a children's book written by William Joyce. Now, for those who have tuned into our show, William Joyce shouldn't be a name that sounds foreign to you, because we have talked about an adaptation on William Joyce's book when we went over to Dream Machine with Rise of the Guardians. And also, William Joyce was the one who wrote the book that was the basis for Disney's Meet the Robinsons. So this isn't the first time that William Joyce's books were adapted into animated movies.
Yeah. So, Epic, for those who aren't aware, is a 2013 American computer-animated fantasy action-adventure film loosely based on William Joyce's 1996 children's book film, which is called The Leaf Men and the Brave Good Bugs, produced by Blue Sky Studios and distributed by 20th Century Fox. The film is directed by Chris Wedge from a screenplay written by Joyce, James V. Hart, Daniel Scher, and writing team of Tom J. Astle and Matt Ebner. So, the plot of the movie is that after her mother dies, 17-year-old Mary Katherine, also known as MK, moves in with her eccentric scientist father, Professor Bomber, in Danbury, Connecticut. Bomber has spent his life researching the Leaf Men, tiny humanoid soldiers who protect the neighboring forest from wicked creatures known as the Boggins. MK is irritated by her father's work and believing that his theories to be nonsense. Meanwhile, Nod, an independent young Leafman, decides to quit, much to the error of his no-nonsense leader, Ronan, who promised Nod's late father he would look out for him. So, right off the bat, this is the way I feel about this movie. And the first thing that kind of comes to mind, strangely enough, is Masters of the Universe. And
really?
Let me explain.
The He-Man movie?
Let me explain what I mean by that, because it kind of makes me feel like there's two different types of stories kind of going on, but then kind of joining into one another at exactly the same time. So you've got this whole story about MK, who obviously has a very difficult relationship with his father, and her father basically has kind of abandoned everything else in his life, including his late wife, his daughter, and basically pretty much the rest of the world, and has basically just been kind of living in seclusion in this really odd looking house with all these gadgets and everything like that. It sort of gives me a bit of a vibe of Charles Muntz from Up, and also maybe Egon from Ghostbusters Afterlife. Anyway,
yeah, but at least those guys had slight motivations, even though that they were kind of botched. With Charles Muntz from Up, the reason why he was spending decades trying to find the bird was because he was publicly humiliated in front of the organization for researching animals, and he wanted to prove them wrong. What is this guy's motivation of trying to find these leaf men and these small creatures? We don't really get anything. He's just I've dedicated my entire life of trying to find this world that is filled with all these mystical creatures that are tiny. Why?
Yeah.
Why are you going to do this? Why have you given up everything? Your career, your wife, your daughter? Are you doing this because you want to prove something to science? Are you trying to do research on these people because you want to see what they are able to teach to human civilization?
Yeah, it's
Or
like
do you want to learn about why that the forest was filled with like desolation and decay, and you want to see if maybe you can like piece this whole mystery? No, there's no reason on why he's doing this.
do you know what? Like, that would have been a way better way to explain the dad. Like, if he saw, like, there was like decay going on in the forest, but then all of a sudden it was like it was regenerating itself, and he wanted to know more about that because he didn't believe that, like, what was happening basically was natural. That would make a lot of sense.
I agree.
But the fact that he went to, like, leaf men, it's kind of like, do you know, actually, this reminds me of another character. Do you know who that is?
What's that?
Mr. Crocker from Fairly Odd Parents.
Oh God.
And like, he was a villain, not a good guy.
Yeah,
Like, it's just,
exactly. And here's the thing. Now, have you read the book?
no. I
I
mean,
have.
on
I've
top
read
of
the
that as
book.
well, I would argue as well that I shouldn't need to read the original material in order to enjoy the
Here's the
movie.
thing. This book has absolutely nothing to do with the movie.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, so the book is about an old lady who cares for her garden, and she is beloved by all the kids in the neighborhood, the insects, and all the creatures that live in the garden. She gets very, very sick, and the insects are trying to find a way so that she can be able to, revive herself because, she no longer taking care of the garden. An evil spider queen comes into the garden to take advantage of the old lady being sick and not taking care of the garden so she can eat the bugs. And then the insects hear the story about the legendary leafmen, and the leafmen come about and they hear the story about a long lost toy. They bring the long lost toy over to the old lady. She remembers about the toy from a long time ago when her parents used to take care of this garden, and she had fond memories over it. She became much better after a while, and then the garden became back to normal, and the Spider Queen was no longer around. That's the story. And Chris Wedge said in an interview with USA Today that he thought that the story was too quaint and decided to put in action moments to make it more exhilarating.
The story sounds better than the movie.
Yeah, I do agree. Even though that the story is very basic and it's a children's book, of course it is, but it's actually a really sweet story. By putting in a whole bunch of action things into it, it just feels really derivative. Like you were mentioning about Masters of the Universe with a mixture of like Up and the Fairly Odd Parents with the kooky scientist professor. But yeah, when this movie first came out, everybody was comparing it to two movies: Ferngully, The Last Rainforest, and Avatar.
I also would put Thumbelina under that as well.
Yeah, there you go, Thumbelina, because we have a little pod that needs to be protected. So yeah, let's throw Thumbelina in there too.
Yeah, just this. I mean, there's a lot. It just feels like this kind of borrows from like other movies, and we also get Queen Tara in this, who's played by Beyonce, which
Yes.
is bizarre. Like,
I
like,
know that was
I
really weird. Like
now
Beyonce doesn't do a
hang
lot
on a
of
second,
voicing.
ladies. I get that Beyonce is like maybe like a queen in like your in your realm of things, but I mean, come on, it's a movie.
Yeah,
Like,
this is almost as bad as Rihanna when she was performing in Home.
yeah, I mean, like, don't get me wrong, like, she is. I mean, but here's the thing about this though, is like, if you're gonna have Beyonce playing a predominant character, like, she isn't somebody you would like kill in the first act. I mean, I don't know, maybe like she was like being paid by the hour to like do the voice acting, and they couldn't afford to like have her in the movie for too long. I don't know. But I mean, like, yeah, I mean, like, you have Beyonce, and like, she's only in for like, the first part of the movie, and then after that, she gets killed off.
Yeah, she gets
Like, it's,
killed off. And then in the mixture of being killed off, we also have Mandrake, who's the villain of this movie. His son gets killed off as well. So, yeah, we have two characters that we barely have any introduction towards, and they just get killed off within like the first 15 minutes.
You know what? You were talking about like, Avatar before. Like, he does, Mandrake actually does look like a bit like a Navi in a
Yeah,
way when
yeah,
you really
and
look at him.
also
It's
a
so
little.
nerving.
Yeah, and also a little bit of like those bug characters from George Lucas's Strange Magic, even though that they came out a few years later. So yeah,
Yeah.
it just, I don't know, like something about the designs just feel really just uninspired and generic. And
Doesn't it? Doesn't the whole thing just look like it was put in a computer and it was just kind of like maybe this is the future. This is what AI is going to look like when when they take over doing movies. I think.
Yeah,
Like,
it's basically like, what would kids enjoy? Okay, kids love funny side characters. Kids love action moments. Kids love epic scopes. Kids love massive open worlds with interesting lore. Kids love this and this and that. Let's put it all together, swirl it up in a blender until it gets pureed, pour it out, and then there you go. There's your final product.
yeah, like it's an epic mess. That's all I can say. Anyway,
Yeah.
Mike, let's talk about Mandrake for a second because good grief, like this is a less funny Hades.
Not only that, but it's also a less funny version of what's that character's name from Ferngully? Like, that
oh, the one played by
Tim
Jim
Curry,
Cummings.
yeah,
Sorry, yeah,
yeah,
no,
that
no, Jim,
guy.
yeah.
So yeah, he the whole point of that character is like he wants to have decay and he wants everything to be destroyed. Very similar to that character in
But
Ferngully.
why though? What's his
Because
motivation to do that?
yeah, I don't know, because he doesn't want balance. He wants the forest to be destroyed. That's it.
You know,
No other reason.
if it was like, this is a responsibility that was handed down to me, or this was like, I want revenge because like, the green did something to me, or like, or I was supposed to be like in line for the throne to be the green, but then they didn't give it to me because they considered me too evil, so I'm gonna take it over. Mwahaha. That's even more, development than what we've got here.
Yeah, well, guess what? If you would have just, yeah, it would have been like similar to Scar from The Lion King, in which he gets jealous of Mufasa and Simba because he's not the king of Pride Rock. Or it would have been like Ursula from Little Mermaid. She was banished from King Triton to live off in this secluded cave. She used to live in the palace. She used to have the luxurious life, but then her evil witchy ways basically got her ostracized from everybody, and she wants to take revenge on King Triton by using Ariel so that she can get back to Atlantica. So yeah, I mean, what's this guy's motivation again? Why does he want decay in the forest? Does he want it because he was banished from the queen? Maybe he was once one of the leaf men and maybe he was kicked out. I don't know. There's literally nothing. No reason
Do you know
whatsoever.
what would be a great twist? Like, Mandrake, like, was saying to Queen Tara, like, you can't have everything alive forever. Like, we all need to die at some point. And like, maybe Queen Tara, decides, oh no, everything needs to be nice, happy, and bouncy and everything. Maybe she could be like Joy out of it Inside Out, where like, she ends up sending, Riley into like an identity, not an identity crisis, like, like a existential crisis because, she's been moved out of everything that ever made her happy, and now all of a sudden, like, she's be happy, like, 120% all the freaking time.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Like they were
Mandrake is
getting rid of
warning.
they were
Yeah,
getting rid of sadness because they don't want anybody to be sad. They don't want to have Riley go through sad memories, and so they put her into a corner. They want Riley to be constantly happy all the time, but then when there's a massive crisis involved, they blame sadness for it. But in reality, sadness is a good thing. You need to be able to have sadness as well as happiness.
Yeah, but that would be a good motivation for Mandrake to say, "Look, Queen Tara, things need to die eventually because you need to like things need to move on into like the afterworld and things like that." And like maybe Queen Tara dismisses her, and maybe like he banishes her, he considers like Mandrake evil and stuff like that. So Mandrake gets really upset and decides, well, in that case, then I'm going to take over the entire world and make everything dead.
Yeah,
Like
that could be
yeah.
a really interesting lesson because if you are into like plant life, whether you like gardening, whether you like researching plants and wildlife, you understand that sometimes there are cases in which plants need to be pruned, plants need to be trimmed so that they can be able to grow and become healthier. Or maybe some plants and trees have to be gone altogether because they've already lived past their life. That doesn't mean that we have to keep them forever. They're just going to stand there and do nothing. They're not going to be able to create flowers for animals to live in or for bees to pollinate in or anything like that. It will be a really interesting lesson about the balance between keeping, plant life alive, but at the same time knowing which one needs to go so that new life can grow.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that's our villain pretty much, just unexplained evil, effectively.
Well, I mean,
And
to be quite honest, I mean, pretty much none of the characters have any motivation. Like, the motivation for the professor is not it doesn't exist. The motivation for the villain doesn't exist, and everybody else just seemed to be like a check mark about like, okay, let's just take all of these cliches and put it together. Okay, we have the angsty teenage girl who recently lost her mother and she has an estranged father. Check. Okay, we have this really cocky young guy who wants to quit being a soldier because he doesn't want to follow orders. Check. We have the really serious soldier who wants to follow orders and he doesn't take no for an answer and he needs to be able to save everybody because everybody else is useless. Check. We need to have those dopey comic relief characters. Check. And then we have to have those characters that are just there because we need to have more characters than just the main ones. Check.
You know what? We've barely got into the story and there's already problems. Like, you know, we've literally just gone through the first paragraph of like the plot of Epic, and already there are problems.
Yeah, like literally the movie begins with Mary Katherine, or MK as she likes to call herself. She she arrives in Connecticut being driven in a taxi coming from the city because her mother died and nobody is around other than her father. And so she has a much more closer relationship with the taxi driver than with her own father. I mean, she even like has his phone number so that she can be able to call in case like she needs to be picked up and be taken somewhere else. And then from the moment that she arrives, the father is not around and he barely even notices her because he's just too busy looking up research on the leaf men. And then when he, arrives to the conclusion that, oh, wow, my daughter's been here all this time, he takes her upstairs and literally nothing from her room has changed because she hasn't been in the house since she was a little girl. And so she needs to, just contemplate on the fact that her mother is dead and her father barely pays attention to her. And then immediately after he takes her to the room, she says, oh, why don't you just pack your stuff in and I'll meet you later because I have more research to do. And yeah, I mean, I don't blame her for just like being overwhelmed with the fact that she's going through grief of losing her mom and now her father is barely existing. So, we have that cliche.
Yeah. We don't even got to the snail and the slug either. And good grief.
God.
I never thought I would say I miss Crash and Eddie, but good grief, do I miss them now?
Oh God, you're right. They're even worse than Crash and Eddie. So their names are Mub and Grub. So they're a slug and a snail, and their purpose of this entire movie is that they keep the pod that will be the future queen of the forest moist. That's it.
Yeah, they're worse than Crash and Eddie. I guarantee you, they looked at the Ice Age and thought, oh hey, let's just do our own version of Crash and Eddie.
Yeah,
and that's basically what
they
we ended up
basically said,
with.
Crash and Eddie is funny, so let's just include these two, a snail and a slug, and just have them as the comic relief. And then they had to bring Aziz Ansari of all people to voice as one of the characters, and he's hilarious. He's great as Tom Haverford in Parks and Recreation, and the fact that he has to play as this slug who's constantly hitting all over MK, it was like, oh,
That is actually just awful, to be honest with you. So yeah,
and then there's also Nod, who's this Leafman warrior who claims that he doesn't need to be pushed around and he doesn't need to be ordered by anybody. This character sucks, by the way. He is so cocky, thinking that he can be able to do whatever he wants, and then he just gets himself into even more trouble. He can't even do one single thing right, and we're supposed to root for him. He's one of the good guys.
Yeah, this is like this is teenage Sid effectively from Inside Out. Sorry, from Ice Age as well. It's I mean he's not as brain dead as Sid is, but I mean it does remind me.
He's worse than brain dead. He is cocky and he is incompetent of doing it because of his cockiness.
Yeah, to be fair though, in later scenes, you can see that he has a bit of heart in a way, and so he's not so I think he makes a little bit up for himself later on, and so he has. I mean, here's the thing about this, but unfortunately, because the story is so convoluted, and because everybody else kind of gets in the way, there's not really much development for this character.
Exactly.
Really.
There was this whole subplot of the story in which his father is dead. How did his father die?
The off-camera disease. Like everyone else who has unexplained deaths in this movie. Like,
Yeah, exactly. Like they made a big deal about, your father was a great Leafman warrior, and he was better than me, according to what Ronan said, in which he was telling him, you have to be able to stick with being a Leafman because that's what your father wanted. How did his dad die? Was he killed by the Boggins? Was he, did he disappear from a mission? I mean, what
like,
happened?
unfortunately, there's not enough time to develop him, so unfortunately, we'll never know. And it's just really sad, really, because, like, if this character kind of turned around and said, well, my dad died horribly, and but even though he was like really heroic, I highly doubt I'll be able to, ever reach his potential. To where he was, and like, and he has like, a personal crisis over that, and he's like, he's going to go flying off the rails, he's going to go off and do some things like on his own and stuff like that. Like, if anything, like, Epic should have had like probably like, a movie about him, if anything.
And there's also another subplot that is very, very underdeveloped, where Ronan apparently had a relationship with the queen, because they were talking about like, oh, the queen meant more to you than you just protecting her. So we can assume that he loved her, or maybe he was even engaged to her. They were probably going to be married soon or something. But again, we never get that development.
Maybe the interesting thing that would have been, I would love to have seen if, Ronin and Queen Tara, before she even became queen, like they had a relationship, but then obviously the other queen died and she had to take on that mantle. So, like, maybe that's probably, why, their relationship never came to pass, because she was so busy being queen that, and also Ronin basically just all he could do was just swear his allegiance to her and basically become like, her main protector,
Yeah, well,
effectively. Like,
unfortunately, we never get that explanation.
yeah, and again, that could have been its own movie. Like, do
Yeah.
you get the feeling that there's a lot of story elements in here that didn't need? There's just all trying to compete for like their place in the sun, effectively. But unfortunately, they're all like there's like 5 or 6 stories all wrapped up in this movie, and unfortunately, there's only 102 minutes to play with,
Yeah.
and they can't do all of them. You
Yeah,
know,
so we have this one story about this leaf warrior who is dedicated to protecting the queen, that may or may not have a really strong relationship outside of, his status. And then he has to fight off against these evil creatures who are trying to take down the forest with decay. Then we have another leaf warrior whose father probably died from battle or disappeared from a mission, and he needs to live up to his legacy. Then we have another story involving with a young girl who lost her mother, whose father is completely absent, and she needs to be able to find the creatures, or maybe even try to try to get a strong relationship with her father, because that's literally all she has left. But in order for her to do that, she needs to find these creatures, or she needs to slap some sense into him. Then we have the professor, who completely lost everything so that he can be able to find more research on these creatures. Why? I mean, maybe he's trying to find out where the decay is coming from, or maybe he's trying to find research on the Leafmen so that he can be able to better human civilization. And then we have this other story about this queen who is protecting the forest, and she needs to stop these evil creatures from destroying it. And maybe there's this really interesting lesson about keeping the balance between decay and life, and she completely ignores it, so she decides to banish the bad guy, and the bad guy wants to get revenge. Like, there's a lot of really interesting stuff here, but unfortunately, it's like you get the bare minimum of all of it and consolidate it into one movie.
babe, I've got 3 words for you: quality over quantity.
Yeah, pretty
Don't
much.
don't you feel about that? Like, I mean, it's just pick one thing, make that the main thing, and then add like side other things that aren't as relevant, and add them onto the story arc, and then kind
Yeah.
of like develop them like that. Like, there's too much here. Like, it's you've tried to make this too epic, if anything, and you've made it not look very epic at all. Like, it's
Yeah, pretty much.
this needed several rewrites. I probably would imagine.
Or maybe even better yet, stick to the original source material. How about
Even
that?
better, yeah, do that. The original story sounds better, and I haven't even read the book.
Yeah.
Like, all I've done is seen this movie, and I feel embarrassed now to say that in a
Yeah.
way.
There's a lot of other character additions that just kind of make me like, why are they even here? Like, there's a subplot plot in the movie where you have Nod, who decides that he's going to go over to be a part of racing birds after he quit the Leafmen, and then you have this toad that he's like working with to make money, but then he wants him to drop out of the race because he wants him to lose on purpose. Usually when you hire these kind of people, you want them to win, not to lose, so that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, like
And
I would have like turned around, like if anything, like it would have been better if like Nod was actually like winning all these races and like, but then like, behind the scenes, like it's rigged and like he's just part of like the scam, if anything. And yeah, that all of that makes no freaking sense. And also like this Zoe character, like he seems to have like this moment where he's gonna turn and like going to tell the Boggins like basically what's going on, but apparently then he's actually like dragged against his will to like say to Mandrake about everything that's going on, even though he looked like he was going to willingly do it anyway. Like that makes no sense.
yeah, that doesn't make any sense. And then you have this other subplot about that the queen was able to give just enough information to MK saying, take this over to Nimgalu, and then she dies, and then we find out that Nimgalu was this glowworm who apparently has magic, but it's just parlor tricks, but everybody in the tree believes him. And so they basically like look through a bunch of scrolls about like what are you supposed to do, how are you supposed to get the pod going, and then it turns out that you have to go to this certain location where the moon rises, and it can be able to turn into enough energy to choose who the next heir is going to be. So instead
they're
of
trying to like they're trying to try to turn Mingaloo into like like some kind of like pastor preacher kind of like the deal, like where he's like he's got the music and like he's got like the whole shebang of like so he's saying the Bible and stuff like that, but actually he isn't actually able to like like those faith healers. You ever seen them on TV? Well, like
yeah, sure.
he's that kind of whole deal, and like they play him out like that, but then they kind of make him look like he's actually useful, which is kind of like wouldn't it have just been better to like say I can tell you, like, I'm like, someone who like logs everything that's going on in the life. And therefore, I can find in history like that. Like he's a librarian kind of like character. Like, he's that kind of like wise character, if you will. Instead, they kind of like made this kind of like awkward, kind of like, kind of gospel preacher, kind of like whole faith healer kind of like deal. Like, where it's all like smoke and mirrors and stuff like that. Yeah, they didn't need to do that.
I mean,
Like, they could
I
have
guess
easily just.
I may are they trying to do a social commentary about how religion can be overly played if done by the wrong person?
I mean, like, I don't. Well, what's social commentary in any part of this movie? There's no commentary here. It's all overdone or or just warmed over, if anything. Like, I mean, I took away nothing from this movie.
I took nothing from this movie either. If this was supposed to, even in Ferngully, the Last Rainforest, I knew what the message was: taking care of the environment, saving the trees, stopping pollution, all that kind of stuff. I took away from that movie more than I took away from this.
You know what? The only thing I can take away from this movie is that if your dad is obsessed of little green men, running around in the forest, believe him.
Or even better yet, join him.
Oh my god, one of us, one of us, one of us. Oh god, what's this movie doing to our brains?
You know what?
Yeah.
Okay, let's continue, shall we? So now that they know what they need to do to the pod, then all of a sudden, Nod becoming the useless asshole that he is decides, oh, I'm going to rip off from Aladdin and I'm going to take MK to a whole new world, or in this case, the forest.
Was that song playing in your head when you saw that scene?
Yes,
yeah, I am show you the world.
Yes. Or even better yet, like the scene from Thumbelina when Cornelius is taking Thumbelina around. Let me be your wings. Let me be your only love.
We need to do a commentary for this movie, I think.
God.
Oh, that just it's so you and I should have watched this together. But by
the
way,
here's the thing: I couldn't
Yeah.
watch this movie with you. Now, here's the thing for you Americans out there and for you people in Europe. I try to watch this movie with Aaron on Disney Plus because that's where all the Blue Sky movies are. I don't have Epic on Disney Plus, but Aaron does, and we tried to do a watch along on his Disney Plus, and I couldn't get in it because Epic is not on my Disney Plus. So we had to watch this separately.
There's no explanation. But why is it that Epic isn't on Disney Plus? Have we actually figured that out?
I mean,
Like,
I think the reason why that Epic was not on Disney Plus was because of like what was it? Like legal issues or something like, oh, pre-existing contracts. That's what it was. Yeah. There
yeah,
was an
so it's
article.
according to the Disney Plus Informer, the movie was removed due to pre-existing contracts with Stars and HBO. The film is likely to find a new home on HBO Max. We can expect Epic to return to Disney Plus pretty quickly once the contract has expired. So yeah, they're waiting basically for the ink to basically the contract to run out before they can put it on Disney Plus. Not
Yeah,
like anybody
so
would mind it.
yeah, the only way I was able to watch it was that I had to rent it on YouTube.
Yeah, but
Anyway, but yeah, let's continue on. So,
well, I
yeah,
mean,
so
I think we can easily say the story sucks, can't
It,
we?
it does suck actually, and that's another. Like I said, this has been a constant complaint with me every single time that I've been watching a Blue Sky Studios movie. The story sucks. Like it's just so
Yeah.
mediocre. It's uninspired, and it's just like an amalgamation of things I've already seen before in other films, whether it be from Disney or DreamWorks or Pixar or anything of the sort. Like there's nothing original that I have seen from Blue Skies that I'm like, oh yeah, like I can see this as like an original fresh idea. It's like yeah, like yeah, that's a problem with a lot of these Blue Sky films is that their stories are so mediocre and the characters, I mean, sure, there's some characters that we did say were very enjoyable, but a lot of them are not very deep. I mean, sure, we've had, we can't have like a Manny from Ice Age all the time, but still, I mean, at least it'd be solid at the least, but no, every character in this movie was awful, whether they were mediocre, forgettable, bland, or just downright annoying with little to no motivations or even a reason why we should even care about them. So,
You know
yeah.
what? We've not even got to. I mean, this is like the story that we're looking into here, and we've got to miss everybody. It's pretty much it's an uninspired mess. I think we
Yeah,
can
it
easily say
is. I
about this.
mean, like the whole thing about like, Nod wanting to take MK to the forest and show her like the wildlife and all that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden, oh wait, not only does he not have his sword with him, even though that Norin told him, take your Ronan told him, take your sword with you because you're gonna have to fight them off. And then Nod's like, yeah, but they're not gonna catch us here. The Noggins are not gonna come over to this. This is the safest place here. Not only do they capture the slugs taking care of the pods, they also partially destroy the tree and they let them go away right before that the moon is supposed to rise so that they can be able to have the pods ready, because apparently according to like a part of the scroll, that if the pod is able to get into darkness as opposed to being in the moon, then it can turn into like a dark queen or something like that, as
This
opposed to
is
being
the,
like the queen of the
and
forest.
this is from the Dreamstone. Like if you take the Dreamstone to like a part of the evil realm, it'll turn it into the Nightmare Stone, and that whole shebang. Like even though I'm sure there's a lot of people who listen to this show who've not like seen the Dreamstone. It is a pretty interesting story. Show actually. I would actually get people to check it out. But anyway, I digress. I mean, that's pretty much the story. I mean, like, I really want to get onto the designs of like, the art that's actually in this. Like even the art is just uninspiring and it's so bland,
It
to
is.
look
It
at.
is
I mean,
very bland.
does this remind you of Ants in some way? The
Yeah,
first
it
DreamWorks
kind
movie.
of a little bit. I mean, there, like I said, there are some things that I saw, some similarities to things like A Bug's Life or Ants or even like Strange Magic, which I know that Strange Magic came out like a few years later, but still, I just couldn't help but think of that when I was watching the villain of this movie.
Hmm.
Anyway, but that's beside the point. But yeah, like I know that William Joyce has a very unique art style, and you can definitely see it when you're looking at characters like from Rise of the Guardians, where they're very angular and they have like really distinct features in their bodies. Like if you look at, like Saint Nick, for example, or Santa Claus, where he's like really, really buff, and then you have like the Sandman, where he's like very, angular and very roundish, and then you have like Jack Frost, where he's very pointy in a lot of places because of his ice design. So yeah, William Joyce has a very unique art style, and you can also see it with Meet the Robinsons, in which you have like the really pointy, angular designs from, the characters such as Wilbur and Lewis and the Robinson family. Like it looks really different, but yeah, here's the thing, that the difference was is those movies were able to play to the advantage of William Joyce's unique art style. Well, here you kind of see a little bit, but it's just pretty generic.
I mean, like, there's, I mean, I'm gonna be honest, the deer was pretty interesting when they brought that in, but like, they played it a lot softer, where everything else feels like it's played a lot harder. Like
Yeah,
it just
and
it's
also, you have the scenes in the forest, which look, it looks nice, sure, but how is it different from any other forest that you see in movies? Like, this movie, came out around, the same time as The Wind Rises, where you got to see the epic scope of Japan when you're up in the air with the clouds, when Hiro was able to design the airplanes. I mean, that stuff is really, really nice. And then a few years earlier with Studio Ghibli, they were able to make the Secret World of Arrietty, taking cues from the borrowers, where they were able to have this huge world with tiny people in it. And that was even way more interesting than the designs in this movie.
Yeah, just it's. I mean, I was just looking like some more images of it now, and even the concept arts don't even look all that interesting to look at. Like they even from like from the very basis of like when they started like designing this thing, it just doesn't feel like even on the background of it all, it doesn't look all that like inspiring. Really, it's
Yeah,
just it's
and then
yeah
there's the
it's
climax, which the climax is pretty uninspired. It's just like, okay, you have the pod that's in the location where it's supposed to grow and have the new queen choose the heir, and then you have the creatures coming in and they're supposed to take down, the leaf men and steal the pod so that it can grow into the evil pod, and you have like basically this huge army coming in, and you would think that this will be like a really epic fight, and it's not really. I mean, it's kind of boring. You just have like a combination of like Ronan fighting off a bunch of these, boggin creatures, and then you have MK getting her dad so that he can be able to turn on his iPod to lure the bats away from the moonlight.
and by how dated is that by basically saying like, oh yeah, turn on your iPod,
Yeah,
like
it's
get the
pretty
iPod speak.
dated. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, the one thing I would say is that I do somewhat like the professor's kind of like design of like he's obviously dedicated his whole life to like this whole thing. He's clearly running out of money. He's got all this archaic equipment around, like all these old CRT monitors and like all this old sciencey equipment that he's all kind of like bungled together. He clearly has basically been trying to get stuff off eBay to kind of like get the stuff working in that. And so, like, there's all that stuff, and all of that looks like quite interesting to look at. But, that's the only positive thing I would say about any of the designs of the movie. That looks kind of interesting. Like, but everything else, it all's like stuff I've just seen before. Like, stuff like you would normally like see in Thumbelina, or stuff you like usually see in Ferngully, or something like you would normally see in this type of movie, or like even the Boggins kind of like remind you of like just generic fantasy villain kind of like things. Like I mean, Search of the Crystal Skull, you and I kind of saw with that, like with all like the Trolls movies and like all the other like
Yeah, well, like
independent like
the
fantasy
designs were very
movies.
similar to like the goblins and Princess and the Goblin.
Goblin, yeah, exactly. Like we it's generic troll type, if you will. Like we've seen this sort of kind of thing before. Really, it's just it's so for us, it wasn't really all that like new to kind of like none of it is sort of new. Again, all of it feels really borrowed. Like these are all feel like they've all come from other movies, and they've kind of like just stuck them all together and taped it all together and said this is epic.
Yeah, and then the whole decision about who was going to be the heir of the forest. Who was it going to be? Was it going to be Ronan? Was it going to be Nod? Was it going to be MK? No, just some little flower girl who only helped the queen once and said that she was her role model. That you're
Yeah.
going to get a little girl to be the queen of the forest?
Yeah, and I really thought it was just going to be like a whole other character that we're going to get introduced to. Like,
Maybe it would have been MK. Maybe MK was gonna give the responsibility of being queen of the forest, and Nod. I mean, for some reason, I have no idea why they decided to do this, but MK and Nod have a relationship together where they fall in love with each other.
I
Like,
have no idea.
I mean, you would think that maybe, oh, MK is going to be the queen of the forest because according to, the queen, she was destined to be in this area and she has this purpose of helping the forest. And, that once she helps her out, then, something is going to come to her, as a result of helping the queen. I was thinking that maybe she's going to become the queen of the forest, even though that would have been weird. But hey, she was able to help save the forest by delivering the pod over and, assuring that the Boggins weren't going to be the the ones to decay the entire thing. And maybe Nod would have been like, come stay with us. I'll be the one to protect you, and taking over Ronan's position of taking, of protecting the queen. But no,
something, when I really think about it, like, look at all the crap that Ronan's had to put up with. Like, he lost like the love of his life. He's had to basically, put up with like Nod for like trying to like bring him up. He's also has to like fight like most of the Boggins, like, single-handedly, like to try and protect this thing. And like, wouldn't it make more sense to make him the king of like the forest or whatever?
That would
When
have
you
been
really
a
think
great
about it.
idea. Yeah, let him be the king of the forest because he did so much to protect everybody. Like, yeah, go from being a knight over to being a king. Why not?
Yeah, like, he gets pretty shortchanged in this movie, doesn't he?
He
When you really think
does.
about it. Oh, no.
In
So,
fact, you want to know what's even worse? The snail becomes a leafman because
well,
reasons.
I mean, like, it would have been interesting that angle. Like, if they played it, a lot better. I think I would have probably like accepted. Like, say for example, like, he ends up being kind of like, being part of like the person who saves like one of the pods. So he ends up being kind of like an honorary guardsman, if you will. Like, so like he ends up being kind of like, someone who like hangs around, like, whereas like, near the queen or near the king or queen or whatever, and like he doesn't basically get into like any trouble. He basically just like he's just there for honorary purposes. That I would have accepted. Like, not someone like you throw into battle.
Yeah.
But yeah, but besides that, like, yeah, like the whole, I mean, to be honest with you, like that when you alone is just not the main problem here with this movie. The whole makeup of Epic is a problem. Like, putting it all, there's too much going on for, to notice, like, every single little problem. Like, it's we could probably be sat here for a long time. That's the reason why I kind of like want to stop talking about the story for a while, because like there's so many problems here that we couldn't probably name them all in one podcast. We probably need like 3 podcasts to like name them all, to be honest
Mhm.
with you, because that's how many story problems are currently going on at the minute.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, the movie has to conclude with just like how it is in Ferngully, the Last Rainforest, in which MK returns back to human size. And unlike in Ferngully, in which, like, she leaves the forest and never comes back, no, she decides to follow in her father's footsteps, following these people. I mean, she even decided to put a pin on where their actual location is because, I mean, I know that for the plot, she needed to have her father find the location so that they can be rescued from the Boggins, but let's just say that didn't happen. You told your dad, hey, this is where they are, go right here, when I'm sure that they probably wanted privacy. I mean, that's like telling the story of The Secret of Nim, where you have the rats telling the scientists, hey, we're right here around this bush in this farmland, if you want to find us talking mice, come here. That doesn't make any sense.
Hmm.
Anyway.
So yeah, let's talk about the music, which quite frankly is just, there's not really, there's only like one song in like the whole thing, which is like, the song in the tree, and that's about it really. There's the rest of the music is pretty generic
Yeah, and
in
this is
all
the
of this.
first this is the first Blue Sky movie that doesn't have John Powell doing the orchestra, doing the soundtrack for the movies. Danny Elfman is brought in instead. And you would think that Danny Elfman, being an amazing composer, he's been doing everything with stuff from Tim Burton, with like Beetlejuice, Batman, Nightmare Before Christmas, and all the other films that he's been a part of. You would think that he would have this opportunity to create this memorable fantasy soundtrack, but no, I guess not.
Yeah, maybe Danny Elfman just kind of like wrote this whilst he was like sitting on the beach or something like that and said, yeah, this will do. You know.
Sure, why not?
Just yeah, just as a also our voice cast, we just celebrities
Yeah,
effectively,
just
just
constantly celebrities, just no particular voice actors other than Frank Welker.
By the way, they must have known that they were going to be quite, in trouble with this movie in regards to like promotion and stuff like that, because, there's not actually just one poster that promotes one character. Like, I'm just going through like all these now, like, John Hutchinson like gets his own poster, and, even Aziz and Chris O'Dowd even get their own poster of like, for promotional purposes. And Colin Farrell also gets his own poster too. Like, they must have been so desperate to like, promote this thing to all hell. Like, they didn't like stick with like one person that they're going to stick on the banner. They did like a poster for like everybody.
Makes a lot of sense
basically.
considering that, Josh Hutcherson, he would have been huge at the time because he was doing those Hunger Games movies. And then Colin Farrell, I mean, like, it's Colin Farrell, he's a major
Yeah.
celebrity. And then Amanda Seyfried, who's MK, I mean, she was doing a lot of stuff. I mean, she was doing Mean Girls, she was doing Veronica Mars, Big Love. And at the time, the movie that she would have been known for was Les Miserables. So yeah, I mean, it made a lot of sense why you had, promote them. And of course, as I mentioned before, Aziz Ansari, he would have been massive for doing Parks and Recreation. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense why they would get like major promotion in the poster saying like, Josh Hutcherson as Nod and Amanda Seyfried as MK in Epic, coming
Yeah.
to a theater near you.
By the way, the Toad, and by the way, his name is Bufo. He's played by a rap singer called Pitbull,
Yes, I
apparently.
know who Pitbull is. Pitbull is a very well-known reggaeton singer who's known for that one song called Despacito, if you've ever heard about it. If you don't know what it is, look it up. You'll know exactly what it is. But yeah, I mean, I would have never guessed that he would be a voice actor of all things. I know of him as a singer, not a voice actor. That is so weird.
Well, I think they just wanted like gangster, and therefore, like that was probably one of the persons they first thought
Yeah, well,
of. And, like,
yeah. Let's have a shrewd businessman gambling toad voiced by a rapping reggaeton singer. Sure.
I'm really surprised he agreed to it. Quite frankly, like it's just I really thought he would have demanded like to be like be played a lot tougher. Instead like he gets threatened by the antagonist.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
don't know.
I don't know.
And then, of course, you have like I mean, like Jason Sudeikis is the professor, and he's a hilarious guy. Like, he's known for doing a lot of comedy, like 30 Rock and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. He had a major, career with writing stuff for SNL. I mean, he's known for being funny, but for him being like this absent-minded professor, that is severe miscasting.
Clearly not in this movie.
Yeah, and then of course we
Yeah.
mentioned about Beyonce being the queen. Steven Tyler is Nim Galoo, which is that's really strange. I think they
Yeah.
just decided to like cast like celebrities that were like popular at the time and then just put them in there because it's they're following the Jeffrey Katzenberg approach. It's like, the kids won't know who these celebrities are, but the parents will, and that's why we're going to get butts in the seats because we're going to have like all of these well-known names that you're going to see performing as these cartoon characters. So yeah, it's just this is like a prime example about like none of the stuff really fits. I mean, we even complain the same thing with robots, and it's like, okay, Ewan McGregor, Robin Williams, Amanda Bynes, Greg Kinnear, and like all of these major actors performing as these cartoon characters doesn't fit. They're just using them because they're popular. It's like, yeah, this is another prime example of just that mentality.
Yeah. So in the book, this movie took about $93 million to make, and worldwide it did about $268 million at the box office. So it did make back about double its budget, but I think for a movie that is supposed to be quote unquote epic, I don't think it really did all that much. By the way, I mean, in a way, I mean, some of it, I mean, besides the movie like being at fault, I mean, like to add, even more salt into the wounds, it came out the same weekend as Fast and Furious 6, The Hangover Part 3, and Star Trek Into Darkness.
Yeah, it
It came
did.
out at a pretty bad time.
It did come out at a pretty bad time. And to think that this movie didn't even make like the top 10 in the highest grossing animated movies of 2013. Like we talked about before that both Ice Age, Dawn of the Dinosaurs and Ice Age Continental Drift were number one or even in the top three of the highest grossing animated movies of their respected year. This didn't even make the top 10. Walking with Dinosaurs was even better grossing than this movie.
By
I
the
mean, well, I
way,
mean, like, no, I mean,
this is the same year that Monsters University came out
yeah.
as well.
I'm sorry, I was wrong. It actually did make a little bit more money than Walking with Dinosaurs, but still, that's no excuse. It came out the same year as Planes, Cloudy with a Chance, and Meatballs 2, and
Despicable Me too.
yeah, and Despicable Me too. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, other than Frozen, there's really not a lot of movies that people remember that came out in 2013. It was a pretty mediocre year for animated films.
Yeah. Stefan Lee, who's on Entertainment Weekly, he actually rated the film a B plus, but he said the story lacks the specialness of a Pixar movie. Do you remember when Pixar movies were great? Yeah, as of this podcast, by the way, like, where we've only just come off Elemental, which has only just managed to break $300 million at the box office.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but I mean, I digress. Like, this movie, from Monsters University came out that same year and made about $700 million at the box office.
Hmm.
This only just managed to double his budget, effectively epic. And yeah, so I mean, all around, I mean, this movie may claim to be epic, but it's barely epic, from what we can see.
Yeah, they should have called it generic.
Generic, yeah, exactly, or borrowed, as
Yeah.
I would call it.
All right. Yeah, I would say that this ties with robots as probably the worst Blue Sky Studios film we've seen so far.
Yeah, like, I mean, do you want to rate this and see where we stand?
Sure.
I mean, like, so to be fair, I mean, like, they really do try with many story elements, and they really do try to bring you in. And there is occasional emotional moments in this movie, so it does have those things going for it. Unfortunately, it does far too much in far too little time, and it just doesn't. It just feels messy, and it just feels lost. The animation doesn't feel all that great either. It doesn't feel like it kind of drags you in. Neither does the music, and neither does the voice acting. It is just celebrities once again, and it just unfortunately, it tries too much to be epic and ends up being, even lower than average, I would say. So I'm gonna give it a 4.5.
All right. As for me, as somebody who just read the book and knowing about that, the only reason why they decided to change it in the first place was because they felt it was too quaint and they just wanted to throw in a whole bunch of action moments to make it more interesting for kids to watch. That is a layer of insult. Like, Ghibli movies don't even do that, where they're like, oh, we need to add these things in because we want to keep the entertainment of our kids. It's like they do the complete opposite, where they actually have slow moments so that they can actually have the opportunity to let the audience breathe, so they can be able to appreciate those moments that are the epic ones. So that's a layer of insult right there, that Chris Wedge said that we needed to add those things in because a story too quaint will bore the kids' attention span. And then you want to throw in all the stuff that was not included in the book. Like, okay, we need to have action moments. We need to throw in, this love story that doesn't go anywhere. We need to throw in all of this stuff that doesn't get developed enough and all these characters that are useless and all that kind of stuff. It tries to be emotional. It tries to keep your attention with this open world, with this beautiful forest. And it tries to have this lesson about like trying to keep the balance of nature itself. And then you have this like story about like, oh, the main character's mother died and she's trying to have a closer relationship with her dad, but he doesn't really pay attention to her, and then that just kind of like gets thrown off the window when it turns out, oh, these creatures were real after all. And then she decides to join along with him. And then you have all of these storylines that doesn't get a lot of focus, where you may think that it should have gotten focus. So I'm sorry, I did not really care for this at all. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. I don't like it.
So 4.25 out of 10, effectively.
Yeah, pretty much. I just think that this is a massive disappointment. A movie that calls itself epic should be that. It should be this interesting film that is filled to the brim with exhilaration and an open world that is very interesting to explore, with characters that you want to be able to get invested in. It has none of that stuff. So, yeah, like I said, it is up there with Robots as the worst Blue Sky movie that we have seen this far. Not recommended.
Definitely not. All right, everybody. Well, that's our thoughts on Epic, and that's our latest journey to the blue sky. So, my name is Aaron.
My name is Patricia.
And we will see you for the next one.
Yep, we're going to be coming into Rio 2 as our next film, so hopefully it'll be just as good, maybe slightly better than the sequel, but we're not sure. But until then, catch you later.
Bye-bye.